video, I want to talk about, I want to introduce the concept of explicit, the keyword explicit in C++. So before we touch on that, we'll talk about implicit and then explicit, right, in C++. Now here I have a code and I have a class point, and we have two constructors and a method, an independent function print point, which is of type point, which is of the class here, and it takes in a value here, or a param by reference, const reference, and then it calls back a function within the class. Okay, so here I have a point instantiated, right, p1. So the class has two params, x and y, so this is cool, and we just call the function here, so that's okay. And then I have print point p1, so I take this instantiated or this instance of the class point and pass it into this function here, which takes in a reference, so it will call this display function and print back p1 again, so that seems okay. And now I have print point, I'm just passing in an integer. This is not an instance of a point, an instance of the point class, right? So this is an integer. Now what happens here, this guy goes here, it realizes that this is just an integer. It needs an object of point p. So it invokes the constructor here, all right, and takes the 5 here as the x param, because single parameter, and it sets y to 0. Then it creates, let's try to get this, or maybe that. Then from here it creates p, right, or an instance of p with setting x to 5 and y to 0. So it becomes an like an instance of the point class, an object that is passed in here. Then it calls p1.display. So you're gonna see, like, first we're gonna have what is gonna be printed. Well, when we do the first p1.display, when you're gonna call the constructor here, right? So this is gonna call the two param constructor, then you're gonna have followed by these two prints, and then the third print, right? It's gonna call this constructor here, single param constructor called, and initialize the values. Now let's run this code and see if everything should be okay, but I'm just showing you the sequence of what happened here. All right, so let's go to the code, and here's my code, and let's run this. So g++ -std c++ 2a on my PC here. So with this is gonna be without, right? So without explicit being used, what happens? cit.cpp. Oh, I'm missing -o. So let's see what happens here. This should run okay, and it did. So now we have, let me just show you this. So now we have the executable. So we go without, right, explicit. So we have here, if you don't mind me doing a snip of this screen so we can talk about this. So initially we initialize this point P1 here, right? So that calls this constructor, and then we do a print P1.display. That's this guy here. Then we have print P1. So this is this here, and let's go down into the code. Then I have print point 5, right? This 5 here, and this is the one that goes here. Realize it's not an object of type point. Then it invokes this constructor, makes it 50, passes that 50 in here, and calls the function p.display, which then prints 50, right? So we're showing here that this constructor is being called, and then this point here is printed. All right. Now we'll make some changes. I'll just put a keyword here where we have point. So let's go to the code here. So I have a code actually. Here we don't have the keyword explicit, but I already have a code, so we'll go to this. Yeah, same code, just with the keyword explicit here. Now I'll try to run this here and see what happens. So the only thing that changed here now is I put this keyword explicit. So if I run this code, so with explicit, cpp. So I'm getting some errors now just by putting this keyword explicit here, right? And it's saying invalid instance initialization of reference type. Let's try to bring that out a little. Oh, yeah. Invalid initialization of reference of type const point by reference from expression of type int in print 5 here. This will cause a compilation error because implicit conversion is not allowed with explicit. Note in passing argument 1 of void print point const blah blah. Anyways, this nails the point, right? That we're getting a compilation error because we cannot do an implicit conversion. Now, what is this implicit conversion here? So let's try to explain what happened here now. So the first part here, right, should be okay, but when the code is being compiled, it realizes, hey, this guy here is of type int, and when it tries to call this function, what will happen? It needs to invoke a constructor to make this an object instead of an integer, right? But with the keyword explicit here, it cannot utilize this constructor to do that. Implicit conversion from int to point is now prevented by utilization of the keyword explicit. So you can't have the 50 happening. You have to create a new instance of the class point, right? And pass the value. If you pass an integer, then it should work. So for example, you see I have it here, right? We have to create a new instance of point, pass in 5, and then it should work with this setup here. Now let's try to do that. All right. So if I just get this and save this here now. So what I'm doing here, I'm creating a new instance of point. I'm calling it P2. And then I'm doing a print. I'm calling the function P2. So I'll pass this 5 really into this function here. Now I'm holding this explicit keyword here. All right. So let's go with this code now. So this is with explicit. Run it and it compiles. So now here, so this is gonna be with explicit. So what happens? So in this case, if you want to use the explicit here, you have to create a new instance of the class and it will work. If you don't create a new instance of a class and you have explicit here, you will have a compilation error because you cannot pass an integer into this function because you cannot invoke the constructor here to pass it in. So this is one of the applications of using explicit. It can prevent implicit conversion from happening. Now, I don't profess to know all the different scenarios, but this is something I would like to share. So I guess you get the point here. When or what is the importance of using explicit? It prevents implicit conversions from happening, right? So I'll end this video here, guys. Bye for now.